welcome to Exploring Hobbies. I'm Jamie Fouché, and we have with us today Michael Deller and Annabelle Griffiths, and they're going to be sharing with us their hobby of puppetry. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you be here. So to get started, why don't you share with everyone how you got started in puppetry?
Well, I didn't start until I was past 60, and we retired, and all of a sudden I just didn't have any more responsibilities, and I thought about this is something I had thought about for quite a while. So knowing absolutely nothing, I went on the web and looking for a class, really. But what I stumbled into was a biannual puppet festival out in New Jersey, and it blew my mind. It was 4 days of the best puppeteers and workshops and instruction, and it was wonderful. And then I found out about the Detroit Puppeteers Guild and joined them, and they are the most helpful, wonderful people, you know, helping a beginner, a ranked beginner along, and it's been a lot of fun.
Excellent.
My second childhood.
There you go.
Yeah, no, I got into it much earlier because as a librarian I was looking for a program that I could do in the summertime that might attract children to the library. And that is how I found the Detroit Puppeteers Guild. Unfortunately, I found them right after my programs ended, but being a librarian, there are lots of books about puppetry. And so I used the books that we had and then found that there were real live people in the Detroit metro area. And of course, like all hobbies, there are some people who actually earn their living doing puppetry. They're professional puppeteers. That's some of who I'm sure Annabelle saw at the festival that she went to. And we have some professionals here. But some people are just interested in collecting examples of puppets, either by kind of puppet, you know, whether it's a shadow or a puppet or a marionette or a hand puppet. Or there are some people who are interested in what puppets look like in other countries. And so they try to get an example from as many different countries as they can. And so, you know, there's a number of ways to go at it. Some people are crafters. They love sewing or they love, you know, sculpture and that sort of thing. We have members, one in particular who's a very talented engineer, but he is also a very talented sculptor. And he has made some beautiful, beautiful puppets. I have never seen Russell Gordonier perform, but his puppets have performed all over the United States, I think, because his puppets are so handsome and so great.
You know, and so what really interests me about that is I kind of had this picture in my mind that what you were going to talk about today was just about using the puppets, right? And what I'm hearing you say is that a lot of people involved with it are also involved on the other end, right? On the technical side, on the side of actually making them. So that's really excited. You mentioned a couple different types of puppets. Are there different types of puppetry? How does all that work?
The puppeteers consider themselves part of the world of puppetry, regardless of the kind of puppet that they use. For instance, there are a pair of puppeteers who worked mostly in Ohio, and this fellow was a soldier in a production of The Princess and the Pea, and he was a soldier in the court. And so they actually used him as part of a production. He's now part of my collection, me as a hobbyist collecting a puppet. But then, you know, as using puppetry as a part of my library work, I had to find something that I could make quickly and that was inexpensive. So this little fellow was made out of scraps of fabric that I happened to have at home. And of course, his big feature is his eyes. And his Russian name is Glaza, which means eyes in Russian. So Glaza, you know, introduced programs at the library and did things, you know, with the children as part of our programs. Now, Annabelle uses her puppets as part of her things that she does.
This one is from the Princess and the Pea, and she, as you might suspect, is the queen, and she's very loud. She has a son named Sheldon the Shy, and when the show begins, Sheldon arrives, and it's his birthday. Happy birthday, Sheldon! Today you're 21! It's time for you to find a wife! And poor Sheldon, of course, is a bit overwhelmed by his mother, but she has no problem. She goes on to put an ad in the paper, and no problem. And I like to make my own puppets because I kind of know as I can envision the personality, and so I can put the personality into the puppet as I'm going. And so I knew she was a redhead and that sort of thing. And this is one of the princesses who comes to fill the ad, and she's not very smart, and she can't carry a tune, which is required. So, but the dollar store is wonderful. Isn't that hair nice?
It is great hair.
$1.
And is that from a doll, and you removed it from a doll?
No,
they just had
sell
hair.
They sell them for $1 for girls to put onto their hair to on the
Like
ponytail.
extensions or something?
Like an
Yeah.
extension.
Yeah.
So if you're not skilled at making puppets, are there also sources to purchase them?
There are.
Yeah, there's a company called Folkmanis, Folkmanis. Folkmanis makes a lot of different hand
Beautiful.
puppets and some rod puppets. Some of our members use them as part of the programs that they do.
Okay.
You can frequently find them in bookstores
Yes,
on a
yes, yes.
tree full
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
all sorts of animals and puppets.
Yeah, one of our members, Mary Ellen Clark, found a wonderful dragon, and he's a good-sized dragon, that she uses as sort of an accompaniment to a story that comes from China. And so the dragon becomes an integral part of her story as she's telling the story. And so, all of us, in some way, we have had in the past nurses or aides from a hospital who are working with children, and they use puppets to explain to the children what's going to happen when they come into the hospital. And one of our current members, Jim Ellis, works with the hospital in doing things so that children aren't overcome or overwhelmed by what they're going to have happen to them when they're in the hospital. And so having a puppet go through it, and they can show the child, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to be done. The puppets serve a useful purpose as well as entertain the children.
That's great. Yeah. Are there other types of tools and equipment that you use besides the puppets themselves?
I don't know about Annabelle. I know that when I was working in the library, you have to become comfortable with microphones or tape recorders, or now I don't know that tape recorders are used, but DVD players or CD players as to do things, because some puppeteers, like me, aren't super good at doing different voices. And so you will recruit some people and record a script ahead of time, and then you play the recording for your show, and you manipulate the puppets while the sound equipment is doing the voices for you, and the music and the intros sometimes, that sort of thing. So yes, you have to learn, and some stages are much more elaborate than the ones I used. Some puppeteers who are really professionals not only have to do lighting and sound, but they have to look at what kind of a stage they need in order to get the effect they want. So for me, the stage was very simple. I was usually working with hand puppets, but if you're working with a marionette, like Othello here, Othello would be worked from above, and he would, the puppeteer would be standing on what they call a bridge behind the drape, where the puppets are performing in front of the drape, and the marionettist is up above. And so that requires an entirely different kind of stage than what I'd be used to as a hand puppeteer. And of course, in Indonesia and in China, there are shadow puppeteers, and in India. And so that requires a stage where you have what looks like from the front just a big white bed sheet, on stretchers.
Yeah.
But when the show begins and the lights go down, there's a very bright light or series of lights behind that. And then the puppeteer manipulates a shadow puppet, which is made out of leather or plastic or something stiff that they manipulate with rods or sticks to create the story on the screen. And so those can be quite elaborate, very fancy. And of course, the puppeteers have to be very careful not to get themselves into the story
right?
as a channel. So that, there are all kinds of skills that puppeteers learn as a result of wanting to do a neat puppet show.
Yeah. So you brought up skills. What other skills do you need to be a puppeteer?
Well, I think you need to be able to take a story and sort of make it your own. So you can find scripts already written on the internet, but somehow they won't feel comfortable to you. So usually I rewrite them with my own way of speaking and the way I envision the characters and using my way of speaking.
And that's what's so neat about being a member of a guild. There are guilds of puppeteers all over the United States and Canada. You get to talk with someone if you're interested in learning, even if you're a hobbyist, if you want to learn more about something, about stage construction or sound equipment or what works best in a particular situation. Sometimes you want to get a particular effect as part of your story, and other puppeteers can help you with that. That's why they do a major conference, actually, every year every other year. I think it's an even-numbered years or odd years. Is it this year?
But they alternate. The national and the regional alternate. So every summer there is a conference to go to.
Yeah. And the regionals, we just did a regional in Detroit last summer. So that tells me it's this year that the national is happening.
Right. Yeah.
The national is happening in Connecticut, I believe, this year. But people can go to those. And for the regional festival, it was like 4 or 5 days. And it was all focused down at the Detroit Institute of Arts.
Exciting.
Yes, it was. It was
great.
really neat. And we had puppeteers perform so that not only could we as puppeteers see what they were doing, but the general public was invited to come in and attend and see what puppeteers do. And there was also a store. So our members have a store so that you can go and buy puppets if you want to, or books about puppetry, or recordings.
Pieces of fabric.
Yep.
Fur.
things that puppeteers want to make a puppet, that sort of thing. So, and the festivals occur in different places. So, one year it might be, in Connecticut or in Detroit. Another year it might be in Minneapolis or in Los Angeles. My wife and I several years ago went to one that was in Oakland, California. So it was, you get to meet people from all over who are interested in either collecting puppets or making puppets or doing puppet shows. Or, offering a particular skill that's useful to puppeteers.
So it sounds like the regional guilds then are part of a broader national guild?
The local guilds.
Local clubs, like our Detroit Puppeteers Guild, and then it is a member of the Midwest, Great Lakes section actually, region, and there's a North Atlantic region and so forth, and then they all belong to the Puppeteers of America.
Got it. So with the local clubs, you know, how often do those clubs meet, and what kind of things would people expect if they wanted to come check out a meeting?
Well, if they become a member, they can get our newsletter, and our newsletter keeps them alert to what's happening and what is the guild doing. We typically have about 4 membership meetings a year, and we will do usually, unless we're doing a regional festival, we will do what's called a Day of Puppetry, usually in April or May. The Day of Puppetry is often like a half day or a whole day, depending on who we're bringing in to perform and what workshops we're going to offer. Some of our days of puppetry are aimed at children and their families, and so it's usually a puppet show that is, you know, fun. And then, so we're going to be having a Day of Puppetry in Dearborn Heights at the Caroline Kennedy Library, the end of May, May the 30th. And so that is open to the public, and people can register for that, and we'll be bringing in a puppeteer who happens to have moved from the East Coast to Ann Arbor, and he's going to be performing for us. Yeah, and he is really terrific. So that will be part of our Day of Puppetry, and there'll be a couple of workshops that people can sign up for and either learn to make a puppet or learn a puppetry skill.
Great, great. So is ventriloquism and using, right, which we would usually call a dummy, is that still a puppet? Is that a form of puppetry, or is that different?
It is, but of course it's a very high skill that person has to develop, and pretty much, you know, you're performing on your own with just the one puppet, probably.
Yeah. Or a series of puppets, because
I'm not into ventriloquism
some ventriloquists
have
a multitude of voices that they can develop with their skill.
One of our favorite comedians is Jeff
Dunham?
Yes. We've seen him live a few times now, and he's incredible,
so much
right?
fun.
And he is a lot of fun. Well, and that's why I asked too about the, you know, like, where do you buy them? Because I am sure someone is making those for him.
Online.
They're so detailed, all of the details that go into his
Just go
characters,
online.
you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. First off, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, you know, Sherry and Lamb Chop, of course, come to
Yes.
mind, right? I mean,
Yes.
you know, at least those of us who grew up at that time when she was on, because it was basically a simple sock puppet, right?
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, and yet she created this character that all these children grew up with and knew who Lamb Chop was, and all of that.
Well, and even earlier than Sherry Lewis, of course, was Howdy Doody.
Yes.
Howdy Doody time on television, and the original Howdy Doody is now part of the Detroit Institute of Arts collection,
I didn't know
because the
that.
Detroit
Yeah.
Institute of Arts is sort of unique in the sense that it has a puppetry collection, and so they have 2 very large display cases in the Detroit Institute of Arts that are pretty much devoted to a changing display of puppets. If people know where the lecture hall is in the museum, the showcases are just across the hall from where the lecture hall is.
Yeah.
And but Howdy Doody came to the DIA, and he now lives there as part of their collection. And there are they have a collection of puppets that was started because a puppeteer who lived in Birmingham donated his collection. Upon his death, he donated his collection of puppets to the DIA. So they really have a good range of history of puppetry in the United States as part of their collection.
I was thinking too, when you were talking about Lamb Chop being a sock puppet, you can do so much with a sock, and you know, the used ones and the singles,
Yeah.
when the mate have been lost, every child can start with that. And this one happens to have been a dollar store puppet.
Cute.
But all you do is put the sock on your hand and shove in the mouth. And this one happens to have eyes, which, but you can put buttons on, obviously.
Right.
A little bit of decoration, however you want to do it, the nose, and you can make it smile. And make the nose twitch. And,
Yep.
very cheap, and
Yeah.
your imagination is the limit.
the limit,
for-
exactly.
The socks are wonderful.
Very cute. You've brought a few other puppets with you. What else do you have to share?
Well, Annabelle
Oh,
brought
okay,
her
well.
her troll.
I have, you're familiar with the Billy Goat's Gruff.
The Three Billy Goats
story?
Gruff,
This is
absolutely.
the troll who lives under the bridge,
Ah.
and he's sort of green and moldy, and he collects toll from the bridge. It's a bit steep. He wants $7, but none of the animals that come across the bridge actually have any money, so it's a bit hard on him. He's hungry. This is the nanny goat. She has a very cute small one named Billy, the kid. And then there's a very large gray with huge horns, who is her husband. And then also I have a rod puppet with me
Okay.
that I'll show you this way. It's actually a worm, and an earthworm type.
He's got his
There's-
grass.
there's his
Scenery.
grass.
I specialize in very expensive scenery.
I see that.
And I tell my audiences that I have taken art classes for this. Now, this one, I have a song that goes with this one, which I won't do the song, but I'll tell you the general drift, is that the earthworm comes up in the morning, and he's looking around, and everything's great. And then he sees another little worm come up beside him, and so he tries to get a date and make out with the other worm. But the other worm says, well, it's not going to work for us because actually I'm the other end of you. And then it leaves.
Cute.
And this is just an example of how a puppeteer, there's no real way, one way to do something. You have to figure it out yourself. So one thing that you really want a worm to do is be very movable. So this one is, because it has a bead necklace inside.
Oh.
So it's nicely weighted, so it moves, and then the beads, of course, allow for a lot of vertebrae, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is great. Do either one of you have a favorite puppet or a favorite character that you have created over the years?
Well, I guess just because of the memories associated with Othello, the fact that he came with us from California, and he represents the work of a well-known puppeteer in California, I really like him. And he was bought at a time when my wife and I really couldn't afford a lot of expensive things. And he had a big price tag on him, and my wife committed to paying for him as a present for our anniversary to me. So
it was a special gift then.
yes,
That's
he
nice.
was. He was a very special gift. And he's an important part of our small puppetry collection that we have at home.
Yeah.
So I guess he'd be the most,
Is it like asking you to pick a favorite child? I guess that's not fair, right?
A little bit, but I have a great affection for that queen that I showed you. I think, as I was saying, you have to write your own script. And I think when you do that, and when you sort of envision these characters, you really put a lot of yourself into it. And I think that there's probably some of my characteristics coming out in that queen.
Where do you get your inspiration? I mean, like, how do you choose a voice, for example? Like, how did you know that that's what the queen sounded like, then that she didn't sound like something else?
When I was growing up, thinking back after I really got into the puppets, and I thought, the skills I brought to it, I had never really thought about that. But I sewed since I was a very little girl, and I made sock dolls. And my dolls and my animals always talked. And I didn't know they were puppets at the time. They didn't have any strings, and I couldn't put my hand inside of them. But if you hold a doll from behind, you can make its head move, and you can push its little hands forward. And, that's puppetry. The definition of a puppet is just an inanimate object that you make real. And I think I sort of felt like I was inside of them and I knew the voice. I just knew what the voice was going to be.
And in terms of inspiration, sometimes having a need for something pushes you down the road to making some choices. And as I said, I used puppetry early in my library career. Mm-hmm. Well, children's books are wonderful for giving you ideas for scripts or for stories. The illustrator and the author, sometimes they're both the same person. You need to be very economical in your use of words in children's books. Mm-hmm. You have to be pretty clever with illustration so that children understand what's happening or what the concept is. And sometimes you look and you say, oh, well, it won't work that way, but this version would work as a puppet show because there's a version of Stone Soup where there's a whole village of people involved with 3, soldiers or something. Mm-hmm. And well, that's just too many. I don't.
How many puppets can you have?
Yeah, right.
Right?
I only have 2 hands, and at best maybe 4 if I can talk somebody else into working with me. But then there was another version where it was just a little old lady and a tramp. And I thought, there's a version I could use as a puppet show with the children. Mm-hmm. And it gets the same idea across, and it's essentially the same story. Yeah. But there's only 2 characters you have to work with. So
it was easier to tell from the perspective of using the puppet.
And sometimes even for those of us who are not that adept artistically, sometimes even the illustrations give you an idea as to what a puppet might look like. Or what kind of clothing might be appropriate or would look good on stage. Mm-hmm. And the illustrator can give you an idea of that sometimes without you realizing, oh, look, that could work.
Yeah. Oh, in talking with you, a lot of what you've talked about is geared towards children, which makes sense, right? This is something that's approaching them. But like we mentioned, Jeff Dunham, do you see a trend where adults are also entertained this way? I know, I want to say the show was Avenue Q. Mm-hmm. It was a Broadway show, right? Using puppetry and you see more. Yeah, exactly, right? And I know that Disney and some of the other places are doing more and more with using puppetry to do their shows. Are you seeing a trend where adults are equally as interested in being entertained this way, or not so much?
I hope so. In Europe, there are many shows. I have seen listing of the season's offerings for a troupe, and they grade them over 14 or appropriate for 8 to 12 or whatever. Here, there's real resistance to it. I think because of the excellence of our children's programs now and the use of puppets, people really think that that's just for puppets. And I've had people who, if I'm offering a show, they'll say, well, we can have up to, the 1st grade, but they would never consider the 5th grade. I mean, But so I really think puppets are for adults, for sure.
Which was interesting when we had the regional festival in Detroit, because there were some programs, some puppet shows, especially some of the shadow shows, that were really very appropriate for adults.
For everyone.
Because it was a much more mature theme, and it required a little more sophistication to appreciate the story and what was being done.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your hobby of puppetry. It has really been wonderful to meet you both. In case our viewers are interested in learning more, where would you recommend that they start?
Well, they can start with the Detroit Puppeteers Guild.
Okay, great.
We have our own website. It's DetroitPuppeteersGuild.org, and that shows them how to get in touch with us. It tells them what's happening in puppetry in the Detroit metro area. And the other thing would be to check out the Puppeteers of America website, which is www.puppeteers.org.
Excellent. Michael and Annabelle, thank you again for joining us
today.
I really appreciate.
Thank you.
That wraps up another episode of Exploring Hobbies. Please look for future episodes later.